Buenos dias. Welcome to the latest edition of the Paddock podcast. We're here recording from our luxurious Airbnb apartment in the downtown Jerez. It's been a very nice place to stay, actually, Dave. You've excelled yourself on this occasion. We're within maybe 100 meters of several fine tapas bars, so I think we're going home probably a couple more kilos heavier than we would have liked to.
Sated. We will be going home sated.
And of course, my name's Adam Wheeler. I'm joined by Neil Morrison to my right and David Emmett on my left. We're going to be talking about the Gran Premio Red Bull de España, the 37th edition of the race at the Circuito de, let me get this right, Jerez and Nieto. Is this the track on the calendar with the most corners named after riders? I mean, we have a Lorenzo corner, we have a Pedrosa corner, we've got a Nieto complex.
Crivier. Pons. Could well be.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I never thought about it, but almost certainly.
It's a real collection of it's almost like a basis for the Spanish Hall of Fame of MotoGP almost to a degree, isn't it? So, of course, we're coming to you thanks to Fly Racing. Our t-shirts. Beg your pardon, Dave. Neil letting the side down for the benefits of our video watchers. Of course, Fly Racing have a fantastic range of complements both off-road and on-road, and rental street components as well. Over 800 fitments for handlebars, bar mounts, clip-ons, brake pads, chains and sprockets, the whole collection of rental, not just the handlebars. Dave, we're going to continue to hound you until you try a rental handlebar.
I've got to measure my bars up, so I shall try and do that when I get home.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, Neil and I would try to, put an effort in for the team by A, getting a motorcycle, and then B, getting a motorcycle license.
21 races, Ad. 21 races.
Yeah. Our audience is already going to be tired of us by then. Guys, first of all, let's talk about what happened yesterday. We were all working and covering the Grand Prix. It was mighty toasty out there, wasn't it, on Sunday? It was the hottest day of the weekend so far. Neil, what was your moment?
My moment of the weekend was, the fight for third place, I think, in the MotoGP race was really quite exciting. We had, obviously, Marquez, Jack Miller and Aleix Espargaro on track for the majority of the race. And the little succession of moves on the lap that Mark attacked Aleix, then Aleix attacked Jack, and then Mark lost the front at the final turn was probably the highlight of the race for me. Mark's save on his left elbow was pretty impressive. It looked as though he was going down. And that was just enough to give Aleix Espargaro the edge and to get clear for his podium. So it was great. Good rides from all three of those guys. Marquez in particular may have thought that this was going to be a real disaster of a weekend, but he managed to salvage it with a spectacular ride. So that was him doing the absolute best with what he had, I feel.
Yeah, it wasn't a barnstorm of a Grand Prix. I loved it just from the fact of the study of Pecco, Bagnaia and also Fabio Quartararo, in that it wasn't even a battle. It was almost like a duel or a staring contest for the lead. But as you mentioned, the battle for third place really gave us some action highlights, didn't it? So, and Jack Miller as well commenting that he was struggling particularly in turn 5 to get the Ducati turned, and that gave Mark the opportunity to go through and start mixing things up. Dave, I know what your moment of the weekend is, so I'm going to come to you last because it's lovely. But for me, I have to say I love the pole position that Bagnaia took on Saturday, because I think it really laid down a template not only for this Grand Prix but potentially what he could be doing from here on in the season. It was the best lap ever of Jerez. It was half a second faster than Maverick Vinales' previous distinction. And I think that really just sent out a loud message to everybody. In the press conference on Saturday afternoon as well, it was quite curious, to hear Bagnaia saying, yeah, this is Fabio's track. And then Quartararo also saying, well, yeah, I believe this is Bagnaia's race. So they're being very complimentary to each other. So was that a slight first strain of mind games we're going to be seeing, or was that just them being very polite? So there's this little dynamic that we saw at the end of last season bubbling up again. So that was the kind of highlight for me. So Dave?
Well, they are very polite, the two of them. Which I think is a bit of a shame. We need a little bit of niggle between them, but I'm sure that will come as the championship comes down. Well, for me, the highlight was coming in the morning on Sunday morning, surrounded by motorbikes. There's no feeling like going to a race on a bike. I couldn't come here on my bike, even though I did actually look at it because of the outrageous price of hire cars. It didn't end up doing that, and it was just wonderful. You really feel like the enthusiasm, and that really typified the whole weekend. I mean, like all of the fans, the fans were going absolutely mental. Sort of sick. They were already packing the grandstands at about sort of 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning, and it's a couple of our photographer colleagues were saying, Cormac, Ryan Meenan, and Rob Gray, Polarity Photo, were saying that as they were going around taking pictures, the crowd was shouting at them, saying "photo, photo," and getting them to take photos, and they're going "way" every time they took a photo, even with their phone. So it was just the crowd really wanted it, and like I don't really like people very much, but for the first time, I really felt. I mean, the race is so much better with the fans. It makes so much of the atmosphere.
How good was the drive-in with Pink Floyd blaring over your sound system, Dave?
Well, I had to set the controls to the Heart of the Sun going at full pelt, so it was very good.
Neil, I mean, we wouldn't talk about it as a classic Jerez Grand Prix. I mean, we've seen far more spectacular atmospheres, I would say, but then maybe because of the pandemic and the fact, especially from the three of us, you were working both here last year and I was here as well, but in 2020 with a double, where it must have been like MotoGP in a vacuum. It must have been a pleasant return to form.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe it wasn't the most vociferous Jerez support that we've seen, but as you said, the fact that it was the first time in 3 years that we had people in attendance just reminded us what a great atmosphere can be. You saw football stadiums devoid of crowd, and it basically sucked the life out of the contest. Wouldn't say it was quite the same in MotoGP, but certainly coming to the races in 2020 and a large part of 2021, I mean, you didn't get that buzz that you have when you come in and there's queues outside the track and the grandstands are sort of buzzing and already full. So, it was great to see that, and it was, let's hope that there's a few more of those kind of atmospheres coming up around the corner. Le Mans next, and then Mugello, of course.
I think we said on the show last week that Jerez is one of those Grand Prix that you do like to recommend to people. I mean, I think it's the combination of usually the climate, which is reliable. The Spanish fans, obviously, as we've said, have their own distinct wave of passion. But then, we've been staying in an apartment downtown and just walking around to get some food or take a break, or even, we've parked the car quite away because the centre of Jerez is quite historic and it's not exactly built for the 21st century.
And it's also, half of it has been dug up.
Yeah, yes, quite a few roadworks going on. But, it's full of people, with MotoGP apparel. It's very clear that MotoGP is in town. It gets the feeling that this is what a world championship event should be like, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it should be. The fans should be here. They're part of it, and especially Jerez. It's one of the places where the fans actually drown out the bikes. And if you think it's 130 decibels, that is very loud.
Let's move on to some of the talking points we saw from the Grand Prix. Neil, coming over to you first. Let's talk about the winner. On Thursday in his media debrief, Pecco was talking to us and he was showing us the range of movement in his shoulders. He could lift his left arm up fully, but his right one just arrived to shoulder height. It looked like he was kind of doing a front crawl, actually. He mentioned that it wasn't a question of strength. I mean, he had strength in the joint, but it was just flexibility. But none of those factors or any of those worries seemed to inhibit his capacities on the Desmos Adichie.
Yeah, I think all of us at some point during the race were expecting him to relent ever so slightly with his rhythm and his speed, but he was able to basically put that physical strain to one side, I guess. And what he did in the closing laps, I think, as Quartararo continued to put him under severe pressure was absolutely exceptional. Really, really impressive. And it does make you wonder where this Pecco has been for the first 4 races of the year. Clearly, there was something done on the bike ahead of Portimao, because we saw the best of him in that race as well when he came through to 8th from 25th in the grid. but this was a whole different kind of race. And in terms of physical exertion, I think maybe another class of race as well, just because of the heat, because of how difficult the Jerez track is. There's no real place to get a let up at all. And the stakes were so high. I mean, we can foresee these two guys fighting for the championship this year, maybe with one or two other names involved. So it was the first real duel between the two guys, and Pecco came out on top. Everyone was coming into this weekend saying that this was Quartararo's track. This was a perfect opportunity for him to score a win. Someone even likened Jerez to the Saxon Ring for Marc Marquez, just for Quartararo. But Pecco stuck it on pole and managed the race. Didn't blink towards the end. Highly impressive.
Do you think it's a change they've made on the bike, or because Bagnaia was saying a change in philosophy yesterday in the press conference? He was saying we've stopped trying to adapt the bike fully to me, and now I'm trying to adapt to what we've got. And Jack Miller, in his explanation to us afterwards, was saying, "Well, yeah, that's what it's got to be." I mean, it sounds incredibly simple, but I guess Pecco was looking for that sphere of performance that he had last year, and thought, well, I need to hone this package more, because he was very complimentary in pre-season testing, but it didn't quite work out, as you pointed out.
Yeah. I think the first 4 races of the year maybe weren't quite as bad as they appeared initially. Obviously the first round was beset by issues with the front ride height device, and they were doing a lot of testing even right the way through free practice, which is not ideal for Pecco. He's a guy that likes to have a settled setup and just focus on his own riding through a race weekend. I think he would have had a decent race in Indonesia had it not been for the rain. He didn't quite get the best out of the rain tyres there. And then Argentina was actually a pretty impressive performance, considering he looked as though he was about to completely lose his head in qualifying and free practice 4 and free practice 3, I think, as well. And then America, we got a top 5 finish. It wasn't spectacular, but it was solid. So reasonably, feasibly, he could have come away with top 6 finishes in each of the first 4 races, but circumstances played a part. He's now talking about being able to brake even stronger and enter turns than he was at the end of last year, which must be quite frightening for some of his and Ducati's rivals this year. And if he can start building up ahead of his steam now, he's going to be very hard to beat.
Dave, you don't get a more pressurized saddle in MotoGP than being an Italian on an Italian factory team for a manufacturer that haven't won the World Championship since 2007. So Bagnaia already has a big microscope on every action or the way he behaves, the way he conducts himself. But do you think the fact that Enea Bastianini has taken 2 Grand Prix wins this year, we've seen the likes of Johan Zarco make the podium, Jorge Martin look incredibly fast but crashy. Has this added up to maybe a little bit more of an extra ball around Bagnaia, and that he's just struggled to break out of it?
I don't think so. I think it was just that they changed so much on the GP22, and it took them a long time to sort it out, because you saw the same with Jack Miller, really. That it took him sort of a few races to actually figure a few things out. Same with Johan Zarco. It was very up and down, all of them. I mean, there's been a Ducati on the podium at every race so far. But it's been a lot of Ducatis, which is a sign that the potential is there, but it was difficult to get out. Now, I think it was maybe Austin, where both Jack and Pecco were saying, okay, we're getting towards a base setup. And then we saw exactly the same at Portimao. They said, no, we think we have a base setup. This, I think, has been the big difference. The big difference has been having a setup that works everywhere. That has helped a lot. That has made the bike now works everywhere. They've got a starting point. Maybe they turn up at one racetrack and it's not quite working the way they want, but at least they've got a ballpark figure. And that was what was missing from sort of previous races. And I think this is the big difference and why they're much more competitive now. And also why Pecco Bagnaia is now, for me, right now, it's Fabio Quartararo versus Pecco Bagnaia for the championship, and then we'll see how Mark comes later in the year. Well, 15 races, we've still got a lot of racing to do.
Yep, and I think Pecco said something quite interesting in the press conference after the race, where he said, you have to start adapting yourself to the bike and not always adapting it to you. And it seems as though after being befuddled and frustrated that the new 2022 bike wasn't doing exactly what he had at the end of last year, he has decided and understood that it should, or he should adapt his riding style a little bit to the slightly different characteristics of this year's bike. So, that's paid off.
Do we serious? I mean, it's been a race between Ducati and Honda really to get their new bikes into race trim and to a point where they're going to be competitive everywhere to take Grand Prix wins. But do we think that Pecco now is on a level where he can start racking up the consistency that's going to be required?
100%. I mean, 100%. This is the start of what you're going to see for the rest of the season. I think. I think that this was also what he needed just for his confidence. So getting his head around it. And again, the difference between Honda and Ducati is the Ducati was a new bike, but it wasn't a radically different bike. The Honda has been built from the bottom up, and I think we had a question from a listener, sort of, why can't they just roll out a couple of 2019 bikes? They can't. The rules ban it. They prohibit it. You have to homologate a bike at the beginning of the year, and you have to use that. You have to homologate an engine. And the thing is, the difference between, this engine is physically very different because you can actually see it when you look at it. The engine mounting points are all in different places, and that means that they've changed the configuration of the engine sort of under the fairing as well. So you couldn't even slot it in. It's no point. And the other thing is, like, if you did put a 2019 bike on the grid, it would get its arse handed to it because we're in 2022. They're different motorcycles. It was fantastic in 2019, but it isn't in 2022. We're going much, much faster already.
Race times are improving every Grand Prix.
Yeah,
so
again, this record, I think we were 1 or 2 seconds faster. 5 seconds, there you go. 5 seconds faster than anyone. So, add that on top of Marc Marquez's time, and it tells you how far back he would have been.
Yeah, I think the race was 10 seconds quicker in Qatar as well. And even though we had, obviously, Mandalika was an inauguration, so that was the first time we didn't have any frame of reference. But, like you say, I think it was Luke Pillington that sent us a question in from Patreon. So, just a reminder to everybody who follows us on Twitter and Patreon, please do send the questions in. We'll try and get you some answers. On that note, I do wonder how long it's going to be before they say to Simon Crafer, you're only allowed in the pit lane from this time. Or they're going to be quite quick with the shutters on the pit lane.
They're already like absolutely hair triggers on the old shutters and the rest of it. I mean, the only chance you really stand of seeing bits and bobs is when they're in a real rush, middle of a session, they suddenly have to make a big change to the bike, and there's no time to actually change things and to actually hide things, to put the shutters up and hide everything away. They need to get a shock in, or they need to change the forks, or whatever. They need to change something. So it's just not time. They're in a real rush, and then you sort of see little bits and bobs appearing.
I mean, we're not talking Mugello or Le Mans status of like antiquatedness, but the Jerez media pit lane and media center is somewhat old. So therefore, we were saying a couple of times over the weekend how they were warming up the MotoGP bikes and it was almost rattling the floor underneath us. I mean, it sounded like some hounds from the depths of hell. I mean, when we're doing these things, and of course, they're not going to be warming up the bikes in the pit box. They have to wheel them out to pit lanes. So that's the...
Exactly. I mean, it's actually been... there was a rule, I think maybe 1 or 2 years ago, where they prevented people from actually starting the bikes in the pit boxes, which is sensible because you don't want a lot of burnt exhaust gases with all sorts of exotic components flying around there. It's a really good way of getting...
or to lose your hearing even earlier in life.
Well, I mean, most of them have lost their hearing, but so that's a bit of a lost cause. But especially the exhaust fumes, it can be fairly noxious. It's throwing out all sorts of unpleasant gases, especially once you first start it up. So it's just very, very nasty. So they're not allowed to do that. They have to roll it out. And there are always opportunities for the enterprising observer to have a proper close look at the bikes. Because, for example, when the bikes are on the grid, they line the spare bikes up in pit lane, and there's generally not very many people around them, so you can have a proper old gander at them. I like it.
What do we think of the veil of secrecy that we find in MotoGP? Because in one aspect it seems quite ridiculous, but in another way you would understand if a manufacturer is spending millions or hundreds of thousands of euros developing certain parts, then they also want to be a little bit coy about it. And Dave, we were lucky enough to be invited to Alpine Stars to have some lunch over the weekend. So thanks again to Chris Hillard for organising that for us. But, we asked him about the shoulder cam that Alex Rins showed off for the first time in Red Bull Ring, I think, last year. And
Austin, was it Red Bull Ring or was it Austin? Oh no, it was. I can't remember. But yeah.
Well, I think it was maybe.
Doesn't matter. It was a great camera.
It was a great camera. I'm trying to think what venue it was now. Well, Red Bull Ring was the first time we really saw the Suzuki ride height device in action. So maybe I'm making a mistake for that. But that was another example of how that particular camera view, which is brand new to an audience, it was showing stuff that only riders had seen before, and of course mechanics. So there's that new window into MotoGP that people might not necessarily want others to see.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that to a certain extent, it's also a healthy dose of paranoia. If you want to know exactly how many revs the thing does, all you need to do is listen to the onboards and filter out the noise. That'll tell you firing intervals, max revs, a whole bunch of other stuff. It'll tell you a lot about the engine configuration. A lot of photographs you can actually sort of get to see, geometry, weight distribution, that sort of thing. If you're an engineer, there's a lot of the sort of variables you can't see, which they know and will be able to fill in or take a very educated guess at. There's lots of stuff you can't tell. So, for example, you'll look at a frame and you'll have no idea, or you'll have you can make a rough guess at what sort of certain stiffness characteristics might be, but you can't see how thick the walls of the frames are, example. So you can't see where the frame is, where the aluminium is thicker, and where it's thinner, or in the case of KTM steel. So you can make educated guesses, but an educated guess is not the same as actually knowing. But it helps. And if you're spending 50 million a year going racing, then spending sort of a couple of $100,000 just to do a little bit of spying is a cheap way of it's a cheap investment.
It was curious, actually, in the media sense. I think it was yesterday or perhaps Saturday. We were talking with some photographer colleagues who cannot use certain types of photograph for media purposes, because if it was I think the shot in question was Stefan
fully
Bradl, fully side on, breaking into a corner, a motion blur in the photograph. So it already has inaccuracies there, I guess you could say. But then, Honda believed that their motorcycle could be intensely measured and scrutinized just from that fully side-on photo. It seems...
Yeah, I mean, it can, because the thing is, you're not looking... I mean, the difference in those photographs is sort of at the millimetre level, and you're not looking at the millimetre level. You're looking at sort of...
general architecture.
Yeah, exactly. But also a couple of millimetres. So you are actually, measuring everything up and all the rest of it. I mean, if you walk down pit lane, if you ever go on a pit lane walk, you'll see the bikes all sort of stood out there. But you will also see that all of the bikes have their front wheel at an angle, because if you put it at an angle, you can't actually measure up or it's much more difficult to actually measure up the fork angle. So you can't sort of have a guess, or you can't see and measure rake and trail. You have to sort of guess it, and that makes it more difficult for people to find out. But like I say, a lot of it's paranoia. A little bit of it is sensible precaution sort of thing.
We're going to take a quick break here on the Paddock Pass podcast, but then we'll be back with some more talking points from the Grand Prix of Spain. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast. We're talking about the 37th Grand Prix to be run at Jerez this last weekend. And Dave, aerodynamics, ride height devices, and some little problems for riders with these small additions to motorcycles we've seen crop up in the last couple of years. That was one thing you wanted to get your teeth into.
Yeah, because, it was a very tense and exciting race between Bagnaia and Quartararo, but really... Quartararo knew that he had 3 laps, basically, 3-4 laps to try and get past Bagnaia. And if he didn't make it in that time, he would have to wait and hope for an opportunity later in the race, or, hope for a mistake. The issue is ride height devices, aerodynamics they're putting more and more load on the front tyre, and so the temperatures in the front tyres are going up and up and up. If you get behind someone, the temperatures rise much more quickly. Talking to Piero Taramassa from Michelin and also from Andrea Bergami, who's an engineer at Brembo, they were saying that the way that the bikes have developed in the past 3 years has been astonishing. They've made huge steps forward. Andrea Bergami from Brembo was saying that normally they see braking performance increase about 1% a year, and the past couple of years it's been up to 10% a year, which is just astonishing.
Is that also demands on the equipment, on the material?
Yeah, it's also creating demands on the material, which is why we see Brembo. We used to be the maximum disc size was 340 millimeters, which they used at Motegi. I mean, originally it was just we've got these 340 mil discs, we have to use them in Motegi because that's where the braking is hardest. Then it was Motegi and Spielberg. Now they're using 340 mil discs everywhere. The 330s barely get used at all, and they've introduced these 355 mil discs and these vented discs. We saw them at Austria last year with the weird sort of like veins on the inside to help cool the temperatures. And it's all just because there's more and more braking energy going into the bikes. So because you've got the aerodynamics helps keep the front down. And the ride height devices changes the way the bike pitches into a corner, and it's helping riders actually brake much later. That's meaning that it's very, very easy to overheat a front tire if you get too close. But also, it makes it the shorter the braking distance, the more difficult it is to overtake. The aerodynamics also, because the most important part of braking is not the bit in a straight line. That bit in a straight line is what the limit there is just sort of the stiffness of the carcass sort of thing. But you can't have a lump of rubber. It has to give you sort of support into the braking. But the most important part is once they lean the bike in and start trail braking, and that's where, for example,
edge grip.
Yeah, edge grip. That's where Fabio Quartararo is so good. Also, that's also where you're using the rear of the bike, because when you are braking straight up, you're doing it all on the front tyre. But once you sort of pitch the bike in and you've got some trail grip, you can use the engine braking and the rear brake to slow the bike. And that, again, is putting lots and lots of loads into the tyre. And it's also more difficult to overtake there. So all of these things are really sort of changing racing.
It's that was the case particularly for Joan Mir yesterday, like we saw in the race. Mir and Neil made up quite a bit of time on the battle for third place, but really just couldn't get involved because he said the pressure of the front tyre went up, and of course affects the handling and his ability to make even better lap times.
Yeah, I think Franco basically you can't turn as soon as the temperature goes up, the pressure goes up, the carcass gets very stiff, and it's much more difficult to actually turn the bike.
Do you think? Maybe it's more a philosophical question, but do you think now that the rules of push MotoGP so close together and made it so fantastically unpredictable, but now we're going to need some sort of other innovation or change in order to assist overtaking? Otherwise, we could end up with, the procession could involve different bikes and different riders, but it still could be less overtaking than we'd like to see.
Yeah, it would be very good if we got rid of ride height devices for a start. But if you think how Ducati have kicked off about the front ride height device, there's no way that they would accept it.
But Dave, you can see how much of an impact it's having already by Miguel Oliveira on Saturday with his qualification. Yeah. The ride height device failed in Q1. He got a chance to do 2 laps without it, and he said that the mapping was off, the rest of the electronic settings were off.
Because the load on the rear tyre is different, and all of a sudden the thing is spinning instead of giving drive, because the whole balance of the bike is suddenly off, and then everything is off. But the thing is, why have we got rear ride height devices in the first place? Because we've got spec electronics. Otherwise, they've been doing loads of stuff with electronics, and they can't do anything with electronics. Well, we'll invent something new. So if you take away rear ride height devices, basically in 5 years we'd have something else, and I don't know what it is, but I'm fairly sure that Gigi and his boy wonders back in boy and girl wonders back in Bologna have got all sorts of interesting ideas about how to make the thing go faster and faster and faster.
Surely, if you want to remove the influence of slipstream, heat, whatever on the front tire, then maybe some sort of diffuser is the next invention we'll see in MotoGP. Why not? I mean, some sort of way.
Like aerodynamics, I know the least about, and I'm the least comfortable sort of taking guess at, because I could sit here and spout all sorts of nonsense, which I usually do anyway. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure there are things that you could be doing, and the trouble is, you know, MotoGP has Corrado Cecchinelli. They have Mike Webb with lots of experience. They've got Danny Aldridge. They've got a few technical people. Ducati Corsa has got, I don't know, 60, 50, 100 engineers. HRC has got, they've got rooms and rooms and rooms full of engineers. They will come up with some really bright idea which nobody has thought of, because the other thing is the incentives are to go faster, and it's really difficult to control. We've seen it in Formula 1, we've seen it in every technical sport. Whenever you make a rule, what people do is find the bits that the rule doesn't explicitly ban and exploit that.
Yeah, the loophole. He doesn't know that much about aerodynamics now. I think we're going to have to find a new expert for the Paddock Pass podcast. I mean, there was a point where the hat got him in, but I think, we're going to need someone more studious.
It's all downforce,
Well, listen, let's move back to the racing itself. One thing I would like to talk about is Aleix Espargaro, because I think this weekend we saw the best and also the most irritating of Aleix. Saturday, the histrionics were back, the arm waving. How dare you follow me in qualification and practice? When Marc Marquez quite fairly pointed out that Aleix is quite high in the championship and he's actually rather quick. So it's not unreasonable to expect him to be towing people.
And also, as someone pointed out to me, they used to be the two worst riders for looking for a tow were Hector Barbera and Aleix Espargaro. So it's a wee bit cheeky for him to be complaining.
Well, the bike is black, so pot and kettle.
He should take it as a compliment, after all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but then again, of course, in the race, he showed that the Aprilia is competitive. I mean, he threw the cliche at us that, his train is arriving and he's firmly trying to jump on it. For me, it looks like the Aprilia is pulling the train. I mean, it's just, Maverick Vinales has his own complications, and you do wonder how much of it is Maverick inflicted. But then, Espargaro just really seems to have that bike sorted now.
Yeah, absolutely. Jerez engineers always say that basically, if you get a bike working at Jerez, then you know that it's going to be pretty good over the majority of circuits. I think Simon Crafar was saying over the weekend, the only thing that you can't really understand perfectly from Jerez is the bike's outright top speed because of the lack of straights. But everything else, you've got heavy braking, you've got fast changes of direction, different types of corner, short corner, long corner. And in the conditions that we had yesterday, I think it was the ultimate test of Aprilia's credentials so far. And once again, They passed with kind of flying colours. Aleix's first back-to-back podiums, I think, in his career, and he would have been a lot closer, you feel, to Bagnaia and Quartararo at the front had he not got held up by Miller and Marquez in the early laps. But I mean, we've gone to every track, 6 tracks, 6 sets of conditions, 6 different layouts, and Aprilia has had podium potential at every single one that we've gone to. I think you have to rate it as one of the best bikes on the grid. You also have to rate, I think, Espargaro as a guy that's riding at the absolute top of his game, and maybe in the long run, a championship challenge will be out of his reach. But, in current form, I mean, this isn't going to be the last podium we see from him for sure. The bike seems to do everything really well. Even a guy like Espargaro, who I think everyone would accept is no Marc Marquez or Jorge Lorenzo, no guy that's been decorated coming through any sort of Grand Prix category. He's obviously riding at a brilliant level, and he is showing the Aprilia to be, a really great package.
I think if there is one weakness to Aleix, it's his ability to overtake. He is too polite because he sat for a long time behind them. It was really obvious that he was so much faster than both Mark and Jack, but it took him 20 odd laps to get past, and he had to wait for a mistake. Where, I mean, if the roles had been reversed and it had been, Mark or Jack behind Aleix, they would have made a hole. They would have found a hole, put their bike in it, and
or force the issue.
Yeah, force the issue. And Aleix is too polite. He doesn't force the issue. I think that to me is his biggest weakness. But the rest of it, he's done really well. He's really, really fast. He's a really strong rider. He will be a championship contender. Well, he will be a feature of the championship. He's not going to win it. He's not going to do. He can't do what Fabio Quartararo can do. What Pecco Bagnaia can do. What Marquez can do.
But then, Dave, he could be the Emilio Altamora. He could be the Joan Mir. He could be.
He's already won a race, so he can't be the Emilio Altamora.
Good point. But he could be the guy that just is there, regular top fives. And while, Bagnaia might win another 4 or 5 races, he could also crash out of 2 or 3. Like we saw in Mugello. Okay, there were mitigating circumstances for that particular race. But then, unless you get the feeling that he's just going to be hovering in the background most of the time on the current form.
And he's been qualifying well as well.
Yeah.
That's there's no real apparent weaknesses in that. Aprilia's
unless you're Maverick
stable,
Vinales.
unless you're Maverick Vinales, but we all know that Maverick has his own set of issues.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, Maverick Vinales is riding nowhere near the same level as Aleix at the moment.
I would slightly disagree because I do think that Maverick is. We saw the pace that he had in FP4 on his own. With a clear track ahead of him when he can ride the bike, he is just as quick as Aleix. The problem is you don't get that, and you have to qualify well. And he was saying after the race, I just can't find. He thinks he still has to find a setup to be able to push for a fast lap. There are still bits that are missing for him. I think things are coming together. I don't think he'll beat Aleix, or put it this way: I think Aleix is going to finish ahead of him in the championship, and not just because he's got a better start, but also because Aleix has been showing up every week, whereas Maverick is. Throughout his career, it's always been the same. He on his day, he will absolutely smoke everybody. But not on his day, on all the other days. The question is whether he actually shows up.
But can you say that when we haven't seen one of those days since March last year?
Like I say, I think the fact that he was just as fast as Aleix in FP4, I think that shows that is a sign that he can and will master this bike. And then it's just down to what Maverick can do himself. But he's one of the fastest riders on the grid, but also one of the most flawed.
He's also running out of time, Dave. But then, as we saw in the MotoGP Unlimited series, which is now kind of somewhat in the doldrums, or it's been paused. Yes, it's in parc ferme indefinitely. Aprilia believed when they were getting Maverick, they were getting a world champion elect, a race winner. There was clear that Aleix, as we discussed before, Neil, has many attributes that he brings to a team, whether it's bonding, whether it's high demands, whether it's good development. That was something I want to talk about in a moment, actually. But then the case of Maverick, his contract's up. He's been asked about his contract. And Joe Roberts, Andrea Dovizioso, Cal Crutchlow, riders who only a year ago were dismissing the Aprilia as a valid career option, whether that was money or it was over the competitiveness of the bike. Now I think you get riders within the MotoGP class and Moto2 looking at Aprilia thinking, actually, I can probably do something with that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So Maverick's saddle is not super safe.
No, it is not safe unless he can show something. I think we're going to see, shall we say, certainly by Sachsenring Assen, by the time we get sort of closer to the summer, there's going to be real pressure on him, and there's going to be, if somebody really starts to show themselves in Moto2. Fortunately for Maverick, there aren't any really clear candidates. Celestino Vietti maybe. And we'll come to Iogura later on, but there aren't really real candidates that you think, right, they need to be moving up sort of stat right now. So that saves him a little bit, but it certainly makes him. It's just. I mean, if I was a MotoGP rider, then 100% you'd be looking at that Aprilia and thinking, that's a pretty good bike. I can win on that.
Yeah, that's just kind of the tortoise and the hare fable now. He's actually moving ahead and actually leaving the likes of Taka Nakagami behind.
Also, just to point out, Aprilia have lost their concessions now.
Yes.
The 1 point for the third places gave them 6 concession points, which means as of now, no more unlimited testing. And then next year, limited testing, limited engines, 6 engines instead of 9, and limits to the places where they can test. They can't just turn up at any old track and have a go around it. They have to nominate test tracks.
Aleix himself, Neil, is quite a curious case study. 11 seasons in MotoGP. He's taken 3 podiums this year, which is more than he's managed his whole career. Okay, the first 3 years were CRT. He was largely on a hiding to nothing with that kind of technology, even though he did take his first Russian finish on those, I can't remember which bike it was now. The Ford? No.
Ford Yamaha.
Ford Yamaha, yes. So, he's had his opportunity, factory Suzuki and then, factory Aprilia. It's hard to imagine any rider now coming into MotoGP and getting that length of time to really establish themselves. It seems that there's more of a clock on riders. Can you give Remy Gardner 8 seasons to get a podium finish? I just can't see it happening.
Yes, exactly. But then again, you cannot exactly measure Aleix's career by wins and podiums when he spent a sizable chunk of his MotoGP career on CRT machinery. He was then bringing Suzuki back to competitiveness after its absence from the class, and then bringing Aprilia up from the whipping boys of the class, let's be honest, to championship contenders. I mean, it's been a long road. That was never going to be something they could just turn around in 2 or 3 seasons. But with Aleix at the helm, he's gradually built that into, or helped build that bike into a championship contender, which that is it's not reflected in wins tallies and championship positions, but I think from a sort of value to an engineering point of view, that's a pretty formidable achievement. That's 2 factories now that Aleix has brought up to winning standards, podium standards, and consistent competitors. So looked at in that way, I think maybe you would add a bit more heft to his career.
Yeah, I mean, he does a couple of things really, really well. He breaks really late and really deep. That's important. That's also important it's the key to a competitive bike, a bike which will allow you to break deep. So if he can help do that, then that's a lot. Engines, engineers understand engines, but he's pretty good on the throttle, so he understands what he needs from a bike to go fast. He's an extremely accomplished rider who has been on some shockingly poor machinery in the past, and now he's sort of really reaping the benefits of being on a good bike.
But it still feels like MotoGP is surrounded by this instantaneous need for success that kind of pervades the rest of society.
I think also it's a question of opportunity. It's a question of the moment, because like I was saying a moment ago, if you look at it in Moto2 now, there aren't really all that many riders who really sort of jump out at you. I mean, at some point we presume Pedro Acosta is going to be really good. Fermin Aldeguer is really good. They're not quite ready to go to MotoGP yet, I don't think. But beyond that, there's not very many. There's not like last year. We had 4 rookies. We've got 4 rookies this year. There aren't sort of stacks and stacks and stacks of riders who are ready to come up. So I think sometimes you get a certain breathing space created for you.
Well, that's why I'm going to be wise to say a rider that we haven't talked about at all, I think, on the podcast this year, Fabio Di Giannantonio.
Yeah.
Digia. Let's just call him that. It'll be easier. We haven't mentioned, but he's probably in a fantastic place where he's in that Ducati fleet, and there are others who are carrying the baton of pressure of expectation. He can just crack on.
Exactly. I mean, everyone's looking at Anea because he's been so fantastic on that bike. But Digia he has time. There's no pressure on him to perform at all, even though Marco Bezzecchi has been absolutely fantastic. And again, another lesson, like Bezzecchi looks a bit sort of on-off on the on a Moto2 bike, but he's been very, very impressive. And he's still making mistakes, but he's just been very impressive all year. So yeah, there is a certain amount of sort of, so much of it is just luck and timing. being in the right time at the right place. If you are at the wrong point or at a certain point in your career at the wrong time,
and make a wrong decision.
Yeah, and make the wrong decision, you can mess things up horrendously.
It's not an easy time for managers either. I mean, you advise a rider. I mean, probably the most high-profile example being Furlong with Johan Zarco.
But surely you said Gian Antonio is under no pressure. There's a really fast Italian rider leading the Moto2 World Championship now. Gian Antonio on the same bike as a guy that has won 2 races this year. Has he scored a point yet? I don't think he has.
Yeah, but then he's his first year, whereas the guy who's winning races is in his second. So you at least have to give them 1 year, Neil. I mean, Espargaro's had what?
If you're
7 on factory bikes.
If you're Ducati and you're choosing a rider for 2023, and you have a choice of Vietti and Gian Antonio, who won 1 race in Moto2, are you really going to choose Gian Antonio over him?
Then that's the case in point. For Digia, it's sweaty palm time all the time.
Exactly,
and it depends who gets moved on as well. We have a few riders sort of getting older. I mean, Paul Espargaro seems to have fallen out of favour of HRC for whatever reason. I mean, it seems completely undeserved because he's actually riding really well and really.
Not for a lack of effort, it would seem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Mr. 120 million%. But. Yeah, I mean, he's trying, but he's falling out of favour. He's running out of time. I can't remember if he's 30. I think he's early 30s. Johan Zarco's having a really, really good season. But France has got a world champion. They've got a really competitive rider. Again, he's in his sort of early 30s. He's not going to get better. He's very good, but he's not going to get better.
But he also seems to have accepted his lot as being Ducati's kind of testing mule to a degree.
Well, yes. I mean, you say that as if he had some kind of choice. One rider at Pramac gets to be the testing mule, and it was never going to be Jorge Martin in part because he's so young, but secondly because he's the golden boy.
Well, is he? I mean, another crash this weekend. He doesn't look.
He was the gold. I mean, he is the golden boy in the sense that they've decided he's the golden boy. Whether he actually is the golden boy is a completely separate question and a discussion for another time.
We're going to take another very fast break here on the Paddock Pass podcast, and when we come back, we'll be choosing our winners and losers from Jerez. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast, the final section of this particular show. We're going to talk about our winners and losers from this 6th round of the series. Neil, over to you first. Who really stood out? Who was your winner from the weekend?
My winner was not the man that won his first Moto2 race, Aero. That was a great performance from him, but it was the man just behind him in second, Aaron Canet, who didn't just finish the race with a recently fractured left radius and a little finger, but he actually pushed Agura for the majority of the Moto2 race and came home pretty amazing second. I mean, just the sort of willpower and the ability to block out pain, the determination to have that result at a track as difficult as Jerez. He was saying that obviously he was basically riding with one arm all weekend. And someone asked him in the press conference after the race whether it was kind of comparable to Jorge Lorenzo's ride at Assen in 2013 when he broke his collarbone Friday, finished 5th on the Sunday, and kind of was like, it was better than that, obviously, because Jorge wasn't riding with one arm all weekend like me. He was saying that he was suffering from arm pump as well. Can I
just interject here? I mean, it was very impressive, but it was his left arm, and the only arm that matters in MotoGP is the right arm because of the braking.
But he had arm pump with his right arm, so he's overcompensating.
So he was riding with 0 arms. Look, bum, no hands.
And also, would he have done it if it wasn't Jerez?
Probably. I mean, he's in the championship fight, the thick of the championship fight. We've seen Vietti falter a little in the last couple of races. Hasn't quite been as strong as he was in the flyaways. So yeah, I think he would have done. But perhaps it was just that extra little motivation to really succeed at a track that he likes and has a good record.
Not enough for us to find out what the Dicky bow is all about.
Do you own a bow tie now? I mean, you kind of also invested in this.
Yes, I own a bow tie. Have I ever worn it? I don't think so. Am I invested in this? Probably, just to kind of see what it's all about, but I'm really not expecting.
Do you own
anything.
a large pink inflatable gym ball as well for your recovery exercises?
Yes, I do. I bring it to every MotoGP race.
We can see why Neil selected Aaron Canet as his winner of the weekend. Dave, over to you. What stood out?
My winner of the weekend is Fabio Quartararo because...
But he lost the race.
Yes, he did. And he finished second, and that's why he's my winner. I mean, Pecco's performance was better than Fabio's, but I think Fabio comes out as my winner because he couldn't win the race. He finished second. There was a year, 2019, where finishing second... there was another rider who did a lot of finishing second and absolutely destroyed the competition. I think that this is a big boost for Fabio Quartararo. It's really good for his championship. He's now the clear leader. Sure, he gave away 5 points to Pecco Bagnaia, but he only gave away 5 points. And also, this was a near perfect ride. I mean, as close to a perfect ride as you could expect from Pecco. But Fabio finished a quarter of a second behind him. That, I think,
I'm not convinced, Neil.
At a Jerez track.
He won the double in 2019. He should have pissed off with it last year, but then at arm pump, he's taken 4 consecutive pole positions. I'm struggling to see how Dave's making a winner out of this.
Well, I mean, I'm playing the long game. This isn't about.
We're talking about the winner from the Grand Prix of Spain, Dave.
Yeah, because he emerges as the favourite for the championship. He's now clearly the favourite for the championship. And Pecco Bagnaia, it's going to come down to Pecco versus Fabio. But Fabio made a big step towards it, because when we look back at the end of the year, it'll be, yes, he couldn't win at Jerez, but it saved his bacon. You know, if he'd have finished sort of 5th or 6th or 7th, it would have been much worse. This was a bad day for Fabio Quartararo because he couldn't win, and yet he still finished second. And he takes a whole load of points.
When we finish recording this video, make sure you don't kick the spade on your way out, because you're going to need to keep digging that hole. What do you think, Neil? I mean, was that a winning weekend?
I wouldn't say it's a winning weekend. Probably a bit disappointed for him that he couldn't win at his track, his best track, at Yamaha's, or one of Yamaha's best tracks. I would say there would be a note of concern because of the strength of Ducati and Pecco Bagnaia. Yes, he's got a decent lead over Bagnaia in the championship at the moment, but we saw in the last half of last year, once Ducati get everything sorted, it could be quite a tough task for Fabio to stay clear.
I mean, for me, what Ducati and especially Bagnaia have shown is, they can win a lot of races, but they're also capable of finishing 8th or 11th or sort of 16th, and that, I think, is the weakness. That's why I say it's Fabio Quartararo who emerges from this one.
Where was Fabio in the first race 1, race 3, race 4, 9th, 8th, 7th?
Yeah.
Don't worry, David. My winner was Moto3. I think it was the best race we've seen yet. It's easy to find good races in the Moto3 category, but I think when you get to the point when you have 5 riders, Neil, going into turn 13, Lorenzo's corner, Lorenzo's turn, what was the official moniker of that?
Curva de Jorge Lorenzo.
There we go, even more authentic. When you get 5 riders abreast going into that corner, I mean, Dave, I loved your tweets, even though they were laced with cynicism about Moto3, that you can watch the first lap, go and make a coffee and come back for the last lap. And there is a degree of truth in that, of course. But, what a finale. I mean, it also really set things up. Izan Guevara's move from the outside to take the lead and win the Grand Prix was very bold, but also incredibly risky. I mean, if anybody on the inside was carrying a little bit more speed, he would have been punted to kind of Alex Crivier style high side on the last corner. Yeah. But it worked out for him.
Yeah, I mean, a long time ago I talked to Aki Ayo about that, and he says he didn't like Moto3 because basically it comes down to who's prepared to take the most risk, which is absolutely the case in this case. I mean, it was a fantastic move, but it was risky as all hell. Peter Bomm also says what he looks for in a Moto3 rider, a good Moto3 rider, is are they always in the front few positions? Not leading the race, but like the top 3, 4, 5. If you are there every lap, it means you're not at risk and you're managing the race. So it was a good race. But I mean, for me, the problem with Moto3 is it's like a highlights reel. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's like those things that they show in the Red Bull hospitality all the time with people doing lots and lots of spectacular things. You think, oh wow, that's amazing. The first time you see it, and then you see it again, you think, yeah, no, that's great. And then by then, it's just all one great big blur of excitement and action. It doesn't. I mean, to appreciate the light, you need to have seen the dark.
Goodness me, we're only 6 races into the year, and the tinge of cynicism is already
I'm 57 years old. I've been practicing it a lot.
Yeah, God, I thought it was bad.
I thought it was great finale.
That was great, yeah. I mean, I don't think we've seen many races. We've obviously seen plenty decided at the final turn at Jerez, but decided by a move on the outside. I mean, I can only think of a few in the past. Eugene Laverty did a great move on Marco Melandri in World Superbikes, going way back.
Still being talked about.
Still being talked about, yeah. Luca Cadalora did something on... John Kaczynski did something on Luca Cadalora, or maybe it was the other way around, back in like 1990 in the 250s. But I mean, it was just brave, but also brilliantly precise. And yeah, I mean, Ethan has been knocking on the door all year. I feel that this is him kind of arriving.
Very quickly, I'm going to put you on the spot. Top 3 talents in Moto3. Is Guevara in there for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who else, from the other 2 would you say, right, those 2 need to progress right now?
Garcia, and I mean, Moreira looks like the pick of the rookies at the moment. He looks really good. Foggia, yes, but he's a little older, more experienced.
What a disaster.
Why is he so bad at Jerez? I mean, like literally, it's. I was looking at his results. He's raced about 5 times, and I think he's finished maybe once or twice, and he's never scored a point.
Did he get a point yesterday?
No.
18th.
Yeah, his best result is 16th.
Only 5 riders finished behind him yesterday, which is pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, it was an awful day for Honda in Moto3. Scott Ogden was the best of the Hondas in 12th. He was saying that basically, well, I mean, Honda have done minimal bike development since, I think, 2019 with the Moto3 machine. KTM are like adding little bits and pieces here and there. Like, for example, I think Dennis Onju was trying some new forks from WP over the weekend, and just little small changes like this kind of add up. And yeah, the Hondas are a little outgunned, I think, in terms of acceleration. They don't have the
Honda has other things on their mind in a different class.
Quite exactly. Also, it can't really brake as strongly as KTM's Moto3 machines, and it's reliant. In some ways, it's a bit like Yamaha when they get a bit boxed in MotoGP. It can't run sort of wide arcing, high corner speed lines because there's a bike basically braking hard and late in front of them. So I think that was really costing their runners yesterday. But yes, Ogden 12th, and Mignot was behind that. Foggia 18th. I mean, shocking the results really. For good result for Ogden as a rookie, another good performance. But for the guys fighting for the championship, it was bad.
Yeah, the 2022 world champion. How did he fare?
He had a bad day.
He had a bad day. It's your bad days, Dave, that make the difference. Anyway, on to our losers of the weekend, and staying within Honda.
Yeah, because my loser is Taka Nakagami, even though he had a really solid performance, a very, very good race. But unfortunately for him, Ayogura won a Moto2 race.
Won a race?
Yeah, it was a very fine race. And because Ogura won, I think that is pretty. It's getting close to being the nail in the coffin of Taka Nakagami's MotoGP career. Obviously, that Idemitsu LCR Honda belongs to Japan. They want a Japanese or at least an Asian rider. Looks like it's going to be between Chantra and Ogura. Ogura, it was a fantastic performance by Ogura. But I think with that is the first sign that maybe Nakagami loses his ride next year, and if not next year, then definitely the year after. Ogura or Chantra will be up there soon. I mean, Nakagami is still to score a podium in MotoGP, and he's had opportunities. He started from pole. Obviously, the very famous incident at Aragon, where he led from pole all of 4 corners until he sort of decided he thought he saw something in the gravel trap and decided to take a closer look.
Also, Jerez is one of his best tracks.
Yeah,
as well,
Jerez
so
is
it's not
absolutely
just,
his best track. I think this. Well, I can't remember what the other track is, but yeah, I mean, this was his best opportunity to get close to a podium, and he came up short. So yeah, I think this was very bad news for him.
Neil, just quickly touching on that, I asked a speculative question of Agura in the press conference saying if he felt he's ready for MotoGP, and he batted it away like an expert, saying no, it was his first race.
As if he has any choice in the matter.
I mean, we were sitting next to each other in the press conference, and I was surprised actually to learn that was Agura's first Grand Prix victory in any class.
First official lap that he led a Grand Prix as well.
I mean, that's astonishing, really. And we're talking about a rider that's going to be representing HRC from Japan in the Premio class.
Yeah, I mean, even though he fought for a Moto3 crown, I don't think he officially led a single lap. But he led that race like an absolute pro, so you have to say chapeau to him. There were no sign of nerves there.
For you, who was the loser of the Grand Prix?
It was KTM's MotoGP project, just because I think we had 5 manufacturers in the top 6. But KTM, Brad Binder was 10th, and this is one of Binder's really strong tracks. Historically, he's been great at this venue. Obviously, he had his debut in 2020 and was stunning. And the sort of the optimism that abounded after Qatar and Indonesia in the first 2 races of the year has slowly kind of withered away. Again, I mean, historically they've complained of turning issues. On occasions it sounded like they have addressed those successfully, but when we're on a tight track, conditions are really hot, and perhaps the front tire is maybe just a little too soft for the KTM riders' liking. Even the hardest front tire that's available, the turning issues are still very much intact. They had an awful qualifying, both Binder and Oliveira, and that's, I guess, 4 races now in the points that it's just not really been. It's not been there. They haven't been sort of anywhere near the podium like we saw at the start of the season, and we maybe expected them to be after the start of the season.
It's still inconsistent. I mean, there were mitigating circumstances in defence of KTM this weekend. They both had rear tyre issues in the race, causing vibration, which is never what you need when you have to make ground quickly. Of course, Oliveira gained, I think, 9 positions from 21st to 12th. Brad Binder as well made up to 10th before he couldn't proceed any further. Oliveira's qualifying obviously affected by, as we mentioned, the ride height device failure. So, yeah, but, I mean, your point is right now, they need a higher level of consistency, really, to challenge anymore. My loser of the weekend, and I feel like I'm picking them a lot, but Yamaha, purely because, again, we're struggling to see any rate of competitiveness from the other riders. Franco Morbidelli seems to be putting a positive spin on things by saying he's found something with the setup that can help him bridge the gap. I think, was it 16 seconds to the race winner? It was a ridiculous amount of time.
20 something, 27, I think.
27 seconds.
27, right? So Tim, blimey. So that's still like a vast difference. And he was trying to say that we've got something that will reduce that time gap. So he's going to have to show that very quickly. And I just think every time that Fabio Quartararo vastly outperforms the rest of his brand mates, then he's just increasing the price. So Yamaha are not only looking somewhat Honda-esque on the track by having one rider perform on their machinery that's looking already a little outdated, but then also they're going to have to, if Fabio's manager, if he hasn't signed on the dotted line yet, then there's still margin for them to go back to the bargaining table and say, well, actually, can you throw in like a nice fancy yacht on my contract? And they're going to be strong-armed into having to accept it.
They do make outboard motors.
Yeah. A couple of nice pianos on top of that.
Like 6 jet skis.
But surely this is a weekend to rejoice, because it does sound, coming from the Yamaha camp, that Fabio Quartararo will stay put for 2023 and 24. Lynn Jarvis said in an interview with Speed Week that Fabio will be assessing the strength of the packages in 2023 and 24. Yamaha has apologized to him for the lack of competitiveness or lack of advancement in its package for this year. which is, I guess, admirable, has to be done as well. Surely the fact that Fabio is maybe a step closer to signing for them for next year and the year after that, that's a big plus point on their weekend.
And they're riding with a 2020 engine, because the 2022 engine they tried had reliability problems. It was more powerful, but they couldn't make it keep together, so they ditched it. They've gone back to the 2022 engine.
2020.
The 2020 engine. So that's why it's so down on horsepower. But Fabio knows that this engine is there. Making engines reliable is just a matter of sort of testing.
Valves.
Valves and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, like, they know it can be done. I think also there is a question of, I think Franco Morbidelli was saying he's got a swing arm to test, and a swing arm is one of those key components. If you're looking for edge grip, the first thing you do is you start playing around with the swing arm to try to get sort of slightly different characteristics. Andrea Dovizioso has been saying, what we need is material. Swing arm is a part of that. So I think there is room for optimism, but then they still have work.
And then Jarvis starting to put pressure on Morbidelli, saying that he was pretty unimpressed with that performance. So Morbidelli needs to step it up.
Yeah, and you think of all the manufacturers currently testing back at the track, while we're recording this, Yamaha are probably going to be the ones that will have some sort of, updates. But anyway, thanks Dave and Neil for chatting over the Grand Prix. This has been the latest edition of the Paddock Pass podcast, brought to you by Fly Racing and Renthal Street. We will hope to be back next week, where we'll actually have a weekend off. Do you remember what that feels like, Neil? 6 rounds into the series, MotoGP continues to march ahead.
Only 15 to go.
Only 15 to go. But we'll be looking ahead to Le Mans, of course, and then talking about any other issues that surface from maybe some contract announcements already by next week. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again soon.